Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for having me here today. So I'm Kevin Ryan. I'm responsible for the software ecosystem inside what we call Neoverse, which is the infrastructure line of business. So we're focused on the infrastructure from edge to cloud to enable the world of 1 trillion devices, right? Really going after the fact that we believe there's a lot of fundamental changes going on in the industry, and we're focused on that infrastructure piece. Since the last Lenaro Connect, which was in Vancouver, there's been some major announcements and major things in the Neoverse world, in the infrastructure world. One, we announced Neoverse in October, right after Lenaro Connect. Shortly thereafter, in November, AWS announced at reInvent Graviton, which is their EC2 cloud instances based on Arm. And then we just recently announced in February N1 and E1, which previously you probably knew as Aries, right? That was the code name for it. So it's been a pretty active 6 months since the last Lenaro Connect. You know, really one of the things that really I think woke up the industry to Arm as being very much a legitimate player in the hyperscale cloud space is the AWS announcement. You know, Jeff was here earlier talking about that, I believe, yesterday a little bit, but we're seeing incredible traction and interest in Arm based on the AWS announcement. From a software ecosystem standpoint, the interesting thing about that to me is more and more people want to talk to us now. It makes my job a lot easier having a platform like that out there in the market. All right, is my clicker going to work? There we go. And that wasn't it, though. There's been a lot of platform announcements as well from our partners like Ampere and Marvell. Larry was just here, as well as Fujitsu and Huawei. Another interesting announcement that happened around VMworld that I'm not sure if you all are aware of, but VMware announced ESXi and Tech Preview. So VMware is very interested in running their virtualization and a lot of the rest of their portfolio on Arm. A lot of the interest there comes from as they push out to the edge with VMware technology, they're seeing Arm everywhere on the edge. So I think that's an incredible endorsement for the Arm ecosystem as well. Let's talk a little bit about how we view the market from a Neoverse perspective. You know, it used to be, if you look at the orange line there on the bottom, you know, the cloud was about pushing video out to cell phones, right? A little bit of an exaggeration, but not much. I think 70% of the traffic is things like Netflix and YouTube and that sort of thing. As we're seeing more and more devices and data being deployed at the edge, the traffic in the internet is starting to reverse. Instead of being from the cloud out, data is being generated at the edge at the device and being brought back into the network. The trick there is you can't just backhaul it all to some central cloud. You have to create a lot of intelligence and compute capability at the edge for various reasons. One is just economics. You know, backhauling all that data is really expensive, but there's also performance and application ramifications as well. So we think this is the huge opportunity for us in the Neoverse line of business is as the internet is fundamentally changing, there's an opportunity for Arm to lead because a lot of these devices, these trillion devices by 2035, a lot of them are Arm-based. So there's a real opportunity to take our edge ecosystem and what's being deployed today and leverage that into how we build infrastructure at the edge and even at the core of the network. So that's the opportunity we see and the opportunity we're going after. We announced, the Neoverse announcement, basically we announced a set of a processor roadmap focused on features and performance for the infrastructure and for the data center. And so we announced the core platforms. The more interesting thing, I think, from my perspective is what we also announced is not just CPU performance, but we announced a complete platform. So we're not just focused on the CPU. We're building reference architectures and designs, complementary IP, unique IP blocks, EDA tools, foundry partnerships, compiler optimizations. We're active in over 25 standards organizations right now. And basically a development environment that spans the cloud all the way out to the edge IoT space. Right? As well as developing a robust software ecosystem to support the entire stack. So we're not just talking about core IP and processor IP, we're talking about the entire platform. And we're working on the entire platform to enable that in the ecosystem. So one of the other things we're emphasizing is workloads and really trying to focus on what are the key workloads that people are going to deploy in these cloud-native applications, things like AWS Hyperscaler, and those sorts of applications that'll be prevalent at the edge. So this is some data from our N1 launch, which is the Aries. You probably know it as Aries, but the N1 launch. So we're seeing significant performance increases in some of the key workloads on the next generation platform. So this is something we're working on and focused on very much now is the workload level requirements at the CPU and up the software chain and making sure we're optimized for those key workloads. E1, same thing, right? This is very much focused on the 5G market and the evolution of the 5G market, but a lot faster throughput efficiency, and compute performance for data plane and networking capabilities. We're working really closely with things like FIDO and DPDK on the data plane acceleration piece as part of this new E1 processor line as well. So that's a little background. Now I'm going to talk about software, which is what I said I was going to talk about more. So that's the platform. That's the roadmap. What we're very much focused on as a group is enabling the entire stack to enable people to seamlessly run the applications they want to run in the cloud. So we've got the networking capability down below. There's some data plane stuff like FIDO and DPDK. An area we're spending a lot of time on is on Acrano in the Linux Foundation. That is focused on edge use cases. And there's a lot of carrier activity and things going on there. We're working with Francois as well to connect that with Ledge and the work that's going on in Linaro, which I think is incredibly important as we sort of work through what these edge architectures look like and what these use cases are. So I think the combination of Linaro and the work we're doing in Acrano will be really important to our success there. Operating system side, we've got the major operating systems now up and running. Not a lot of issues on the operating system level. The area we're working on, really accelerating our work on, is around language and libraries. All these applications, these cloud-native applications, use these interpretive languages. So we're working with the maintainers and the foundations of the major languages to work towards getting ARM to be a first-class architecture in how they do their release process and how they develop the roadmap for languages. I think this is a really important area for all of us, is making sure we get a robust engagement with the languages and the major languages in those communities to make sure ARM is really a first-class citizen in those environments. The other thing I'll talk about a bit is, we're doing a lot of work on the container side. We recently joined CNCF as a gold member, and we're working very closely with Kubernetes. There's been some announcements to date, like Rancher has an Edge K3. They basically built that multi-architecture from day one using EC2 instances, so they built both on x86 and ARM and released a multi-architecture support from day one. But we're doing a lot with the CNCF. And the goal there is we're working with that group to make sure that we are part of their CI process, and that when things are released, when projects are released, they're released on ARM and Intel at the same time. And then the workload piece. We're finding some really interesting data as we get deeper into the workloads, and we're starting to see people start to spin up instances like A1 instances. One of the things we're finding is if you take a look at an application like Nginx, for example, 60% of the external IP addresses that hit AWS hit Nginx first. So it's a huge workload in these cloud environments and in AWS environments. So we've been working with Nginx on performance, and what we found is that even the A1 instances are as performant as the Intel instances in AWS cloud. So we've got great performance story, as well as if you purchase EC2 instances, we're about 45% cheaper. So it's a pretty compelling thing. It performs about the same in some of these workloads and is about 45% cheaper. So we're seeing a lot of uptake on this. We're also seeing a lot of these companies now want to partner with us because they see that as a compelling part of their story to their customers, right? Customers are always beating people up on cost. There's a way to take a lot of cost out of your deployment by running on the A1 instances in the cloud. The other thing we've spent a lot of time with is Works on Arm. And I think Jacob has been up earlier talking about what they're doing with Works on Arm. But we set out to really make sure that we had an environment where people could come develop and get access to Arm hardware to basically do their development work and play around with Arm hardware and get used to Arm hardware. Right now, we've got over 7, these numbers are changing every day, but we've got over 70 active projects right now on Works on Arm that people are running and doing development and test work on Works on Arm. And I think this number's gone up pretty dramatically, but there's about 175 systems in that environment. So we're working very much on the key applications and key parts of the stack that we need to make sure we're first-class architecture, but we're also making sure we have broad access to the developer community and that they have access to Arm hardware through things like Packet as well as AWS.